Sup everybody, this is Karak with ACG, and as always it's my continuing mission to bring you reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. What happens when you mix Starship Troopers Call of Duty and a mobility-restricted main character with a fused spine into a VR game? You get Farpoint for the PS4 family of consoles. Now Farpoint is out now for $49.99 and anywhere from $90 to $140 US if you want to buy the gun as well, because sadly, as with most of the things of this nature, only like 11 were apparently made and most places are sold out. So let's see how Farpoint did, shall we? As always, if you liked the video, maybe subscribe. So here's my review for Farpoint. Spacesuit back braces, ready, set, reset, and the luck of landing in another planet's Grand Canyon. Graphics are up first. So as someone who covers a ton of VR content, I still feel like it's important to remind folks that VR titles consistently and currently don't look as good as normal titles. Now that's an intrinsic issue related to their needs for actually drawing the same scene in two ways and overall density of the resolution, indirect reflection of the additional immersion that VR should allow and should reflect in the game. With that expected takeaway, at times Farpoint actually does look good for a VR game, like the first moment you find yourself hiding behind the ancient remains of a space vehicle that impacted the planet you're on, and you're leaning and hiding behind items, and suddenly what looks like an AT-AT walker mated with a squiddy from Matrix comes thundering out of the rubble at you, bent on removing the sentient bipedal wart from its ass in the form of you. Now, smart use of color and effects try their best to hide the fact that during much of Farpoint, the game is almost stunningly bland in both execution and level design. And sadly, much of that is in the first few hours of the game, with you trudging warily through closed-off corridors, tunnels, and rocky crevasses so that you can, wait for it, get to the next rocky crevice or tunnel or corridor. The devs try their best to keep the game visually interesting with a rockfall here or a VR visual and audio log there. But in the end, Farpoint's name could have just been an indicator of that distant moment in the future you hope for when it starts to actually visually impress. Luckily, even when the game has you in the most boring of locations, its immersion is stunningly good at times. With normal games, you're close to the moment and the location. With VR, you're there, and in those ways, Farpoint nails it. The first time a facehugger space crab hybrid leaps towards your face and you realize, I need to kill this thing right now before I become some kind of broodmother like that chicken Slither, or the scramble of insect feet and then seeing dirt and debris fall from a cliff face to your side as something moved just out of the corner of your eye. VR here pays off in spades, and I assume that anyone on the wrong end of one of the rock crab massive hybrids that can kill you in 1 or 2 hits will feel just a little bit of sphincter tightening horror as you scream at your shotgun to please, for all God's sake, reload just a little bit faster. The biggest detractor here, though, is the fact that despite fairly good visuals for spaceships and the people you somewhat encounter on your way through Farpoint's 5-hour story, the battles can feel noticeably lean in enemies and variety. And I'm not sure if that's a concession to worrying about folks trying to move too fast and losing connection, or if the aliens here have just watched too many movies and feel like the protagonist can be killed by sending out the smallest number of bad guys possible, despite the inevitable waves that have been sent out before being demolished by a single dude who moves at the speed of Grandpa. Ultimately, from a design standpoint, there's some disappointing stuff here. Now, throughout Farpoint, you're going to gather some weapons, and sadly, they apparently were all created by Mundane Inc. There's assault rifles that heat up but have unlimited shots, shotguns that do massive damage and need time to reload, and a couple later as well, and you also have laser-guided missiles. If there's one thing I can say, though, about the weapons, their effects and their feel, it's that they lack any distinction or snap or polish whatsoever. For a marquee title, I'm actually blown away extra art design wasn't performed on these to make them visually stylistic, and their recoil and animations leave a tremendous gap between desired and delivered, especially in the VR spectrum. Especially because this is a time in a game where immersion could have been omnipresent, when the feeling of being on an alien planet with probably woefully underpowered technology could have been told in many ways, with animation showing recoil and different overall stylistic looks. In the end, Farpoint does perform well, never missing a frame rate beat no matter what is going on screen. But sadly, that might be because for the most part, the game is actually somewhat drab and overly simplistic, and isn't a great visual representation of what gamers were hoping a well-financed large-scale VR title would probably offer. And that goes across the scale, from creatures to the way they move, the dynamics, animation, just pretty much everything. And of course, that brings us to sound, music, and voice.
The hell is that?
Your call. Okay. Wanderer, please maintain your position and prepare for manual boarding. I guess we're taking...
Shit!
And sound is always up first in this category for audio. If anything, this is where I feel that Farpoint shines, as the PS4's breakout box is actually handling extra audio processing. You get some spectacular surround sound, even with headphones, resulting in a feeling of complete immersion in the title. There's some really incredible stuff here as you work your way through the confines of a cavern that looks like aliens landed and staged a Burning Man concert right before you showed up, to walking out into a precipice and hearing that wind whipping over your head as you stare into the abyss. Weapons and creatures also sound pretty good. While weapons have no real surprises nor real characterization, their effects and processing is actually excellent when coupled with VR, and it's hard not to be impressed with the change in acoustics when you're charging aliens head-on around a massive stalagmite, and the audio noticeably crunches up on that side and then opens up back as you exit. Very good sound. Music. So this is actually an incredibly low-level affair with mostly ambient synths playing out as an undercurrent for the activity on the screen. The real issue here is that most tracks have no real presence at all and sound like generic sci-fi music track purchased off the internet #1. Now, there were a couple here that I really liked in specific areas, but the moment I thought, hey, you know what, this isn't half bad, it was bookended by a track that screamed, hey look, I found Sweetwater's synth page on the net, I wonder what they have. Altogether, I'd say not terrible, it's just mostly lacking in any real impact on the situations at hand, and is a little bit stepped back from what I'd like. Voice. So I have to say, for the most part, this is actually really well done. Now, while you're exploring, you're constantly tracking 2 other survivors on the planet, and their experiences played out with you watching in on both of them is poignant and also well played. Just an excellent job with them. Even the handling of momentary pauses when someone realizes just how much of a shitstorm they're currently in, to the puzzled garumph sound that a scientist makes when you introduce to him something that he can't explain. The real issue here, though, sadly, is your voice, the main character. Luckily, you don't talk too much, but the level of delivery goes from subtle to stunted the moment your character opens his mouth. Most likely a voice direction issue, as it never really sounds like the voice actor was reading from a script, but overall, not up to the same level as the other characters. Gameplay. And of course, as always, I have to start with a little bit about story. So you're approaching a space station set to meet up with the folks already on it who are investigating a stellar anomaly, when that anomaly goes apeshit and sucks you all into it. Ducking statistics, facts, and science, you somehow all crash land on the same planet, somewhat separated by a very little distance. Now, the rest of the game is you running through the world trying to catch up with the other survivors and watching what has happened to them since you've all landed. The problem here is that Farpoint is almost supernaturally rote in all of its gameplay, hinging and in many ways hoping VR will somehow pick up the slack for what is the equivalent of monster closets and stunningly tight locations. And that's where this review could end, if Far Cry didn't actually have some shooting and movement nailed down at times, because it does. And hey, despite the other issues I have, there is no way I'm going to pretend that hunkering down under the onslaught of aliens, recklessly throwing their body fluids at me like cons in a bedpan prison fight, isn't a tense affair, because it is, at times, stunningly so. Or scanning in holograms you find to further the story and sitting back immersed in a series of storytelling events that draw close, if not downright open comparisons to the Batman VR experience everyone else raves about. Can you kneel? Yes, and you move slower accordingly. Can you dodge shots? Yes, and it works remarkably well at times due to the extra spatial information you will actually get from playing in VR. Can you Serious Sam it and sprint out into the enemies turning and burning? Yes, you can, absolutely, and those were some of the high points. The problem is that the game is attached to hardware that is, sadly, woefully inadequate for this kind of game. So much so that aside from the headset and possibly the Move controls many bought, Farpoint is also bundled or can be played with the PS4's new aim controller. But the issue is that the current hardware just hampers everything you try to do. As other reviewers have pointed out, from aiming up and the game's sensors losing accuracy on what you're doing to moving too fast and the game just losing knowledge of where the fuck you are at all. It's the design decisions in the game that actually hurt it. Not a bad game, but it's the fact that it's meted with this technology. Enemies are going to leap at you, but if they miss you, they will friggin' run back and reset right in front of you, like football linemen offsides and resetting, yelling, yo, sorry dude, my bad. It's ludicrous, and it actually looks funny. And yes, you can spin and you can shoot them, but if your little dome of glowiness that the PS4 tracks is lost, your entire world's going to go haywire. For every time the game makes you want to do something and even feel like it's a tense shooter with aliens on another planet where nothing but your inevitable death is probably in the future, it then reminds you that your death will most likely be caused by the fact that apparently your spaceman has a back injury, and the moment you try to turn around or do anything crazy, you're beset by back spasms and just have to lie down. Now, using the controller versus the aim is a simple comparison, so let's get into it. One, you hold both hands basically parallel, move and shoot if you're using the controller. The other, which is the aim controller, you have one hand that's farther forward and you move and shoot. and both pretty much worked as well as the other in any given circumstance. Now, for me, I was just as immersed when using the controller as I was when using the aim controller, and both worked well. And it really didn't matter if I was aiming down the sights or hip firing, it worked well unless I tried to aim too far up or down and then it lost its shit. Now, when it comes to enemy AI, they're all on various patterns, and while boss battles were pretty epic, overall sometimes it feels like you're fighting enemies that other enemies probably tease and call names because they have trouble with the alphabet. Really, a game like this needs to work with the tenets of the technology it's presented on, and in many ways Farpoint does, like its sense of scale and its immersion and its excellent sound work. Sadly, at other times, it is a constant reminder of a patchwork product and design restrictions brought on by that. And some of the choices really puzzle me. For example, why can't most of the enemies reset by climbing up and around on the cliffs beside you, out of range and out of the possibility of you watching them and realizing, hey, yo, these guys are cool, they want to fight or be fair, so I guess they're just running back to be in front of me. In the end, it is really noticeable, and there's some issues here that I think could have been fixed with a little extra time. Fun factor. Yeah, sometimes the immersion in this is amazing. Ducking and weaving and lining up 3D holographic sights just works, and your accuracy and the speed at which you can take down enemies is fantastic. Sadly, for every moment the game requires or asks or says that it can deliver this kind of stuff, it also delivers disappointment. More so from a hardware point of view than a software one, and this was tested on 4 different systems to verify the issues, and they were experienced across all of them. You know, the game tries to deliver, it tries to solidify your existence on planet Mars too, with some really good storytelling and certainly some hefty moments and attempts at atmospherics. But it's like playing in a world where most things to do are out of bounds, and the game warns you by either going batshit insane or just resetting everyone back, like a timeout was called somewhere. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating scale. This is actually a rent or a deep sale, which are pretty much the same thing. This is a game that is fun from time to time, and it has co-op missions for friends to jump in and play in waves of enemies, and it tries very hard to deliver a far more robust title than most VR titles do. But it misses many times due to the inaccuracy of the almost archaic hardware it's now presented on. Without room scale, you get fused back syndrome, where trying to turn without high accuracy means you're aiming at enemies up in the sky and you experience your own world's first personal earthquake. I think in a game like this as well, you should certainly buy the game and try it with a controller first, but really this is a title that has a ton of restrictions when you're playing it. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Maybe check out Twitter or Patreon. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.